and I will start to share my screen. So we're here because of the COP. Let's be clear. What is it? Well, it is, to give it the UN jargon, the Climate Change Conference of the Parties, and it starts on the 1st of November 2021. The parties it refers to are the governments who've signed the UN Convention and the Paris Agreement. And the aim of it is to speed things up and to hopefully get some new agreements. If anyone has had any experience of these huge events, there will be thousands of official delegates. The world leaders, the prime ministers and presidents tend to come for the last couple of days and argue ferociously over wording that has been prepared by their negotiators over about 2 weeks. Some of this stuff can be excruciating. I listened to a session at the Rio+10 UN summit where about 25 people in a room spent 3 hours arguing over whether two phrases should be connected by the word and or the word or. This is how they get international agreements. But we shouldn't ignore the fact that this is going to be one of the largest gatherings of world leaders we've ever seen in the UK, which is appropriate because it is the biggest crisis. And the key point here is, well, there's two key points. One is this desperate need to finish off the Paris Agreement that was made in 2015. They call it implementation guidelines, or other people call it a rule book about how governments cooperate. It's difficult and it's horribly complicated, but I think there is a real desire to see some change. The other key point is that this will be 5 years, well, 6 years on from Paris, and the governments all committed then to bring back new nationally determined contributions. In other words, what each government is saying what they can do. It looks like the UK's nationally determined contribution will be announced in the next few days, possibly at a major climate ambition summit on December the 12th. And there's some reports that they will commit to reducing UK emissions by 69% by 2030, which isn't as much as it needs to be, but it is more than the 50% that they were talking about before. But at the moment, we haven't got far enough. And some of you may have heard Christiana Figueres speak at the Sheldonian last year. She, as the person who navigated the Paris Agreement, made it very clear that this COP is critical, not just for us, but for every living thing. So, what else is happening? One reason we're starting early is that we have a key role because we're in the UK. Alok Sharma, the minister, will be president of the COP, and the UK has got to lead by example. These 5 points have come from a range of NGOs, and we'll hear more about them later on. Britain, UK, really has to get its act together. Use our influence, support poorer countries, and of course, we've made a bad start on that by cutting our aid budget. Support and fund nature-based solutions. Absolute halt to all new support for investment in fossil fuel. It's absurd that the UK government is still using aid to invest in oil and coal. And finally, of course, get our own house in order. There's a lot being done already by NGOs, and this is a horribly dense slide, but as I say, I'll circulate these afterwards. The key point is there's a lot going on. The COP coalition is based up in Scotland, and there's worldwide members, and there's a real focus on making sure the unheard voices are heard at COP, frontline communities, women from the South, and so on. There's a major COP climate fringe planned. This will include the demonstration. There's always a major demonstration at these events. Loads and loads of events are being planned. We've also, some of you will have seen the youth mock COP that happened over the last 2 weeks. We did invite someone to feed in. If there's anyone out there who was involved in the mock COP, please do make yourself known and tell us what happened briefly. Friends of the Earth nationally are working with Friends of the Earth International, which links us to 76 other nations, and for Europe to really push for global ambition, and also pushing the UK government. The UK government has also got its own act. If you Google COP26, you'll find the official government website, and they are talking about some big project called Together for Our Planet. Local government, cities, major conferences planned for cities in Glasgow, and we need to look at what our cities might do and our towns. And last but by no means least, the Climate Coalition, which links 140 organisations, including people like Friends of the Earth, the RSPB, Oxfam, and the Women's Institute, who I think are on the call today. And I'm going to hand over to Stuart from the Climate Coalition to talk about this in rather more detail.
Brilliant.
Hi, Stuart.
Thank you very, very much, Chris. Just bear with me one moment while I just share my screen. Right. So yeah. So first of all, just like to say a huge thanks to for Chris for inviting me to speak to you all. It really is really very happy to be here. And I just want to kind of Chris has already done a great job of talking about some of the stuff that's happening at COP. But I just want to go into a bit more detail about why this one is so big. I mean, so we've had 26. Well, this is
okay, guys.
COP. So we've had many of these already. But I want to talk about why this one is the super COP. Why this one it really is the big one, and why it really is essential that we make this a success, because there is so much riding on this. But before I just get into that, just want to talk briefly just about who we are, the Climate Coalition. Chris gave a great intro before, so just some of the stuff that we're involved in. But with the UK's large group of people dedicated to action on climate change, so as Chris said, that was 140 organisations with 22 million voices. And our goal is basically to kind of bring these organisations together around shared moments where we can kind of bring the collective weight of the sector, of those engaged in the climate movement together, and use all these, incredible amount of people to really kind of have a political impact and make sure, make sure that our voices are heard by government. I mean, so most recently that kind of manifested itself as a virtual lobby that we did back in June 30th. That's something you might have been involved in, where we managed to get 300 MPs to have calls with their constituents, with more than half of those being Conservative MPs, which is particularly happy about, because often found that those can be quite difficult MPs to engage with on climate issues. So that's kind of some of the things that we try to do with the Climate Coalition, the way we try to bring organisations together to create those moments. So why is this a super COP? So Chris has already given some of the things about why this is so big. And just on the basics, it's 5 years since the Paris Agreement. And as part of that agreement, it was agreed that every 5 years, nations would come together with what they call a nationally determined contributions, which is basically just another word for a plan for how they're going to meet the Paris Agreement, which had a cutoff of, a limit of 2 degrees with the idea of limiting it to 1.5 degrees. So it's been 5 years since Paris. So this is the first time for those updated plans to happen. So it's so key that those plans are ambitious and those plans are aligned with the science, because this only happens every 5 years. So it's vitally important that that we get those plans happening. And it's also just the beginning of a crucial decade of action. This is obviously this is meant to take place last year and now take place in 2021. But this 10-year period we're in now is so critical for getting on track to climate change. It really is. I know it's sometimes been mentioned in climate change, we're running out of time, and this is the time. I mean, we're already getting, this is basically one of the last few chances to actually really kind of make something of this. So it's so critical that we get this this climate summit right. And if not now, when? So, but other than those things that would have made this COP big already, and one of the biggest we've ever had, what other kind of things are making this even more important? One of the main things is that due to the failure of COPs that have happened in the past, there there have been lots of issues that have been unfortunately not been agreed upon and have been kind of rolled over. It's kind of the default at all these negotiations, that when they can't agree on something, they'll just go, well, we'll just sort it out next year. And they've been doing this for, unfortunately, a few years now since Paris. And so there are a number of big issues that have been rolled over to this summit that, you know, we really can't wait for any more to get answers on. So these include carbon market mechanisms. So this is just the idea that countries can trade sort of permits to pollute between each other. It's kind of the idea of rewarding countries that cut their emissions and penalizing those that don't. I mean, it's a bit of an outdated idea now, but it's still something that could have, you know, a big impact if we can kind of make that happen and get agreement on how that works. It also includes funding for loss and damage. This is kind of being a hot topic item, you know, particularly for developing countries who are the most, who are being affected the most by the impacts of climate change, and kind of agreeing on what support is going to be coming from developed countries to developing countries. And as has been going on for more than 20 years now, developed countries have been sort of skirting around that topic of trying to agree to that. So it's so vital that we finally get, particularly with the impacts of climate change only becoming more clearer with each year, and the kind of the impacts they're having on these countries, that we really kind of get an answer on that about what kind of support will be coming from developed countries. And another thing is climate finance. Back in 2009 at the Copenhagen summit, it was agreed that developed countries would provide 100 billion in supporting climate initiatives, so getting things like solar power, renewables in these developing countries. It was agreed to have 100 billion, and since then only a fraction of that, I don't know what the exact number is, but I've not hazarded more than about 20% of that has gone to these countries. So it's vitally important that that as well is finally agreed on. And also, as Chris mentioned, just how to introduce nature-based solutions into the Paris Agreement. There was a distinct lack of mention of nature-based solutions in the Paris Agreement. And so we really need to work out just what role they're going to play. So lots of kind of big issues that really need to have a conclusion. And this is the opportunity to make those happen. But the reason why things are potentially looking good is there are lots of things that suggest that while we failed in the past, this may be the summit where things are finally going to get working, because there was lots of prevailing headwinds that hopefully should give the opportunity to agree some of these issues and have some real ambition at the summit. So the first one is just the impact of COVID. It's had some devastating impacts around the world, but has kind of provided a bit of a sort of reset idea of what we're spending money on, and kind of give an opportunity to kind of redirect funds to certain places. And so it's given that kind of space where we can look at these ideas and see they're actually possible, and kind of given that chance for countries that haven't been previously on board to get on board. And for the first time in 4 years, we have a US president who believes in climate change, which obviously a very good first step, but also his plan is a really ambitious one, and far more ambitious than Barack Obama was suggesting back in 2016. And so that is a huge boost, because before the most recent COPs have suffered greatly from a lack of American leadership and Trump just being basically completely absent, or rather not, unfortunately not absent. Unfortunately, he was very much there and trying to ruin everything. So for the first time, we really have a US who is going to play a productive part. So some of those key issues that have been failing since since Paris, have a good chance of getting some agreement on. And the final sort of component of why things are looking good is that the other kind of party pooper over the last 10 years has been China, who have been always being sort of, I can see you say saboteurs as well, starting with sort of Copenhagen back in 2009, but continuing that trend throughout the decade. And they've finally, in the last few months, started to give real clear signs that they're on board finally for getting some ambitious climate action. They announced they were going to be reaching net zero by 2060, which, while is later than we really need, it's still by far the biggest announcement they've ever made in their history on what they're doing about climate change. And so it's a really, I mean, I'd say it's a game changer in terms of them getting on board, and them finally being a productive member and a contributing member to actually having action, rather than being the force that's stopping these things. So there really are a lot of forces that have previously been an issue, but are now at this COP finally coming together to give a really good chance of having a successful COP. But so going on from that, what makes a successful COP? What are the kind of key ingredients that we need to have to make this COP go well? And the first is that most of those things, a lot of those things are already happening already. Those things like those nationally determined contributions I mentioned before, countries are already announcing them. And as Chris mentioned, the UK is expected to announce its on the 12th of December. And so it's so vital that the UK sets an ambitious NDC, because if the UK isn't being ambitious, I don't know who is. It's going to be very difficult for the host to claim any sort of credibility if it's not making an ambitious commitment to climate change. But hopefully we're expecting a relatively ambitious, at least more than we were expecting, announcement from the UK, which is a good sign. And while it could definitely go further, it should hopefully raise ambition, which is great. The second thing is just what happens at COP26 themselves. COPs have always been a bit notoriously difficult arenas to access. And as Chris said, they are bogged down with just outrageously long conversations on vocabulary and whether to use the words. The Paris Agreement nearly fell apart because they couldn't decide between the words should limit emissions to 1.5 degrees or shall limit to 1.5 degrees. Apparently shall was a bit too, that sounded a bit too necessary. That sounded a bit too like they have to do that. So should was like, oh, that was the compromise word because, oh, that's kind of a bit more voluntary. But that nearly collapsed the whole summit. And there was, hours of late night conversations desperately trying to work out that. So that's the kind of negotiations that happen at COP, but they are still vitally important that we have someone there who we have Alok Sharma there, who is playing a really proactive part and making sure these negotiations, that hopefully a lot of them already happen in advance, but things do move fast at the COP. So there is some agreement that can come out of it. And finally, it's, well, basically kind of a way down to us is what progressive coalitions and alliances are emerging in the coming year that's going to really put that pressure on the government to make sure that these things can happen. There is so much. As a movement, I think we've achieved so much over the last 10 years, particularly with a conservative government. It's a hard slog, but there has been some great successes. But this year, they really cannot afford to forget that there is a huge amount they need to do at this summit, and cannot forget that there is that pressure and demand from people to have that. And to just talk a bit more about the British government, they do want this to be a successful summit. They do not want to hide this away or to kind of pretend it doesn't exist. They do want to make this successful because they have this, this is our first big summit since Brexit. In fact, it's the biggest summit we've hosted, as Chris said, probably about 30 years. And it's a huge opportunity to kind of set Britain up as this global Britain of, we are still a major power in the world sphere. And so they are really keen on that. But as also Chris mentioned, there things like the cutting of the aid budget by £2 billion also is a bit of a problem in kind of setting those ambitions up before the summit. And so they are what that kind of says is that there is a lot of potential to have change, but it could go the other way, and there are forces in that government who are kind of trying to push things the other way. So our role is really try and make those make sure that those forces inside the government are the ones who want action, are the ones that are being heard. And like I say, it doesn't want to be embarrassed. It really does want to make sure that this thing goes as well as possible, and that it doesn't look like Britain is a joke after Brexit, which unfortunately often on the global sphere, that's often been the case with some of its actions since Brexit. But this is a really great chance for them to establish themselves as a sort of a new global power. And like I said before, they're really, even though it seems like it from sometimes from the media and from the Conservative Party, there really are a lot of progressive conservative politicians who really do want action and really do get the seriousness of the science of this stuff. So it's not always beating your head against a wall trying to get these things through. There really are people in that government who I've spoken to who do understand the need for this, and it's kind of so incumbent on us to make sure that we're the ones pushing, so those people can turn to the government, to the Prime Minister, and show that there is so much support for these actions. So just very quickly on kind of what the Climate Coalition is doing. We've kind of worked out sort of a very brief. I'll just give a very brief kind of overview of our sort of plans for up to COP. I'm just particularly looking at one of doing another virtual lobby. In the summer, we had a really good success with that. Last time we got 15,000 people signed up, and like I say, 300 MPs. So that's if anyone interested here, definitely a great chance to try and get a meeting with MP and kind of try and push them along. Also, hopefully that'll be happening around the same time as the G7 summit, which is also a great chance to influence government. So a great opportunity to kind of influence some political actions that are going on there. And then finally is in September, we're going to be organizing, along with a number of other partners, a climate festival, which is just going to be basically a mad week of action, of events going all over the country, from the very big events. So it could be concerts, it could be seminars, it could be things like that, right down to small things like tree planting, street parties, all just a kind of a mishmash of everything going on all over the country for a week in action in September. We're going to be teaming up with lots of organizations, not just within the Climate Coalition itself, but also outside of it. So business groups, faith groups, sports clubs, institutions, and kind of really trying to make this week a kind of a big week-long party of action, a really kind of a moment the government can't miss, and kind of really kind of ramp up the pressure in those 2 months before COP. So that's something to look out for. And I'll post the link after this just in the chat, where you can sign up for our mailing list, where we can keep in touch with some of this stuff. So that is basically it all from me. I think my just summing up note would just be this really is the year for the things can happen. This really is kind of the year to finally get on track for things. It's so vital, if you're interested in this stuff, to really get involved and really get engaged, and do what you can to try and drive up that not just awareness about the COP, as unfortunately it hasn't quite reached that moment where everyone knows what it is and everyone's desperately talking about it on the streets, but also just getting involved with your local politicians, with your local communities, and really just trying to do as much as we can to make sure that this COP has every chance of succeeding. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass back to Chris. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. But yeah, no, thank you very much all for your time. It's much appreciated.
Well, thanks a lot, Stuart. If people have got questions, I found that really helpful, and I thought I knew some of it. If you want to type your questions into the chat, because there are 3 screens of people, so I may not be able to see you if you're sticking your hand up. So please do think. We have got a question or 2 already, and one from Shota Samkaradze. How far, Stuart, do you think we can rely on the government framework? How far can we empower local communities to bring the real change?
So I think the focus on the local particularly is a really important thing to mobilize in the coming year. One of the things that when we speak to Conservative MPs, and what kind of gets them on board, is seeing that local action and seeing what people are doing locally. It's we can tell them all the facts in the world about the dangers and the things like that, but if they see some people in their local community getting motivated, getting involved, but it's doing things like tree planting, or even if it's things like green jobs appearing, or a council divesting, just any kind of action that kind of they can see in their local constituency, is the kind of stuff that really finds is that stuff that moves them and stuff that engages them. So I mean, it always varies between who your politician is and how open they are to talking to you, but I really think it's so important to empower local communities, and I guess in terms of kind of how we can do it, it's just kind of going out and having those conversations. It's making those links between groups. It's really kind of, it's what we kind of do at the Climate Coalition, which is trying to bring groups together. And I think there's a really important role to be doing that at a local level, between all kinds of groups, whether you're a climate group or whether you're a faith group or a sports club. It's trying to kind of get all these kind of different voices, different identities together, and get them engaged. And I just to also just quickly touch on your question about China, about is it right to criticize China for climate change? I would just very quickly on that, just say that while that, at the moment China is the biggest emitter in the world by some distance, its historical emissions are about 9% of what's in the atmosphere, and 28% of the US's, and I can't remember what the UK is, but I think it's maybe even more than China's. So what is key is not kind of focusing on one particular country, but is on focusing on what we can do here, which is pushing the UK government to be as ambitious as possible. And if we can kind of raise that ambition and create this kind of global atmosphere where you have to be ambitious, then it doesn't really, China doesn't want to be embarrassed like anyone else. It will come along, and it is making those moves already. So I hope that answers those a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Jill Hickman was actually asking, who are the progressive Tory MPs? Let me widen that slightly, because obviously in Oxford, we have one Lib Dem, one Labour, and 4 Conservative MPs. Any ideas on how we get to the progressive Tory MPs? We know that there's things like the Conservative Environment Network.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to. I mean, there's as Chris mentioned there is the Conservative Environment Network, which is, I think it's about 80 or so Conservative MPs, all of whom are really engaged in environmental issues, and some of them do really fantastic stuff locally. We have some great relationships with people in Parliament MPs who really aren't afraid to kind of stand up to the government and say and call them out when they're doing things that are right, and kind of how to access those MPs. I think the first kind of step is, looking at who an MP is and engaging them as much as possible. So getting them as much input, whether they're Labour, Conservative on board or not, is really kind of speaking to them. But then also kind of taking part in these movements. So just take, for example, the Climate Festival, taking part in these big movements where people can kind of really see these groundswell of action that's going on all over the country. And if they can kind of see that these are from people from all backgrounds, from diverse jobs and identities, that's the kind of stuff that gets them engaged. But I think that, as individuals, the main thing we can do in terms of against politicians is just talking to your own politician and just really kind of making sure they don't forget to keep climate change as trumpeting that in Parliament as loud as they possibly can. Okay,
thanks. Carl has got a question about, does the coalition have a sense of which countries are likely to be the blockers, and also which issues are likely to be the most difficult? And is there any way we can focus our lobbying?
So in terms of which the blockers, as I say, it's kind of difficult as the rules have kind of been changed from previous COPs. In the past couple of years, it's been America and China, not as if they're working together. They've just been people who just did not want agreement, and so they're just doing their own separate things to block things. And so there are still parties that will be turning up. Russia has historically not been particularly helpful. So as groups like Saudi Arabia, a lot of those Middle Eastern states who have large oil export businesses that they don't want threatened. But at the same time, it's not. I don't think they really have the power, because they've always in the past kind of hidden behind China or America as kind of the people to kind of put their points across. And so when Russia or Saudi Arabia, without China or America to kind of back them up as they have in the past, they don't really have that power anymore. And so I think there could be some really interesting progressive dynamics where if America does do as it says, and that's always a big if, but I'm hopeful that and China, it kind of follows through on some of its promises about the ambition it wants to introduce. And I really think that there can be progress there. And in terms of kind of which issues are likely to be the most difficult, I think in just some things I mentioned before, the things like loss and damage, particularly, is always very difficult issues, because while it particularly for developed countries, for them to kind of admit America has never wanted to admit its historical responsibility for these emissions that are now causing terrible disasters in a lot of the developing world. I think it was last year Mozambique got hit by like 2 cyclones in the space of 6 weeks, and never been hit before in its history, something like that. So loss and damage is going to be a really difficult one to get developed countries to commit to, because they don't want to give that money. They don't. A lot of them, particularly the more nationalistic ones, and include the UK, and I include that among that, they don't want to admit that they're responsible with it for this. So I think that could be a difficult issue, but I expect still groups like America to come to the table willing to offer more. So while it might not be what is needed, it would definitely be an improvement on what's gone before.
Okay, John Griffiths made an interesting point about, is there a much better chance of success now because of the postponement? It got the feeling the government was not well prepared this time last year, and we've all had a lot more time to think about it.
I would agree 100%. I think particularly with Brexit, which is obviously happening, kind of the crunch is kind of basically happening right now. I think if we'd had COP back a month ago, it would have been very, very difficult for the government to kind of leap between trying to organize this massive international summit while also trying to keep on top of negotiations that are going quite terribly and could really need some emergency attention. So I think just that in itself, and having hopefully a government in a year's time that is fully focused on this event, will be it is a major plus. But like I say, there's also, I think, not just our government, but as things like COVID has that's kind of changed a lot of the game in kind of given lots of kind of that pause to kind of think about a lot of things that we're doing and the places that we're investing in and our future and preparing for future disasters. And I think, now everyone, very much wants to prepare for the next future pandemic and get that under control. Well, also, that opens the question, well, if you're thinking about pandemics, we've got a very, very real, awful tragedy heading our way. Let's do something about that too. So I think, yeah, it definitely offers a much better chance of success.
Okay, we've got various questions coming in. Some of them are about local action, and I'd like to come back to that because in about 5-8 minutes time, I'd like to shift the conversation back to what we're going to do in Oxford. Mary Gill has pointed out that all the Oxford Tory MPs are theoretically or have been members of the Conservative Environment Group. So we should be holding them to that. But there's also questions about the MP. There's a question first, in fact, about what role do you see for the opposition to play? And I think someone else has talked about lobbying Layla Moran. What can Labour and Lib Dems and indeed the Greens do?
Well, I think one of the things that has been, in short, I think they can do a lot. I think as part of Keir Starmer's leadership so far, he's been quite hesitant to go out on too many issues, apart from with the Jeremy Corbyn one. He's been quite kind of pulled back from kind of being too ambitious about anything. And I think that's actually a big problem, because if we don't have an opposition that's really pushing the government on what it should be doing, then I think the Conservatives can go, well, we're ambitious compared to them if Labour's position isn't very ambitious. So it's vitally important that Labour have an ambitious policy so they can go, this is what needs to happen. And the Conservatives have to be looking over their shoulder going, wow, Labour were promising this stuff. Okay, maybe we need to think about what we're doing. This Conservative government has been very clearly that it can be susceptible to public pressure and trying to steal kind of the opposition's ideas. Its usage of the word green industrial revolution, which is what Boris Johnson's been talking about. That's straight from almost Jeremy Corbyn's mouth about what their plan was. And so if we can get a Labour opposition pushing really ambitious environment action, then I think that will be vitally important in kind of holding the government to account, because without that, it's going to be really difficult to kind of push that the Conservatives as far as possible. And likewise with the Lib Dems, I'd say exactly the same, that we really need to see climate as an issue where the Conservatives should not be the ones in the lead on this. They shouldn't be ambitious ones. It should be the oppositions who are putting the ambitious stuff out there. So I think it's vitally important that those parties need to do more to get on board. And so lobbying them and trying to get them to push that action is really, really important.
Okay, There's a couple of questions about the climate and ecological emergency bill. I mean, you might want to say what the coalition's perspective on that is, but any ideas on how we get Conservative MPs supporting that?
Yeah, so it's a really difficult bill to support, because while, or sorry, not to support, to kind of to talk about, because while we wholeheartedly at the Climate Coalition we wholeheartedly support what it's trying to achieve, and I think it's a great, well-structured bill that would do a huge amount of good. The problem with it is that the places that it's come from has made it really difficult for the Conservatives to get behind. Unfortunately, the Tory press, and also some own goals by Extinction Rebellion themselves, have kind of made Extinction Rebellion, anything associated with them, poisonous, I think, to the Conservatives, and it makes it quite difficult for them to get on board with anything kind of even associated with them. And so I think I think the way we need to think about getting Conservatives on board is, and sometimes it's difficult to do this, but it's really effective, and is to kind of really think about the framing of these issues and how we can kind of go at them as kind of working together with them and from the kind of ground up, and how we can not kind of sort of pressuring them, these bills on them, because as soon as they kind of see that it's a Labour-led or Green Party-led or Social Extinction Rebellion, they don't even look at the bill. They just hear warning bells, and I've got to get away from this. So I think it's really, there needs to be a way of kind of framing these things, these same ideas, but in a way that's kind of from a mutual place of kind of working with them, rather than kind of a confrontational one, which I think sometimes has been the case. I hope that kind of answers some
I think there is a lot of work to be done, but there is a meeting, as Anne McLachlan has said in the chat, on the Oxfordshire CEE Bill Alliance is having a discussion on the 11th of December, to which all the MPs have been invited. I gather 2 have said they will attend for some of the time, so that's a start. So I would urge people to keep on track of that and look at how we can really negotiate carefully with those Conservative MPs. And as Robin Gill has pointed out, the bill is not purely by any means an XR initiative. And Peter Thompson was asking, do you know what Extinction Rebellion are planning for the year? Which I doubt if you do, but you might have some ideas. But how does the coalition work with XR?
So yeah, so on kind of how we work with XR, I think XR do fantastic work on kind of, I think, particularly in the kind of the last couple of years, the space that's open for climate change as a public discussion has opened hugely. And I think definitely a big part of that is down to work of things like the climate strikes they did a couple years back, and also work with people like Greta Thunberg and stuff like that. So I think they've done a great job of kind of bringing climate to the fore. And in terms of kind of how we work with them, I think we have 2 different kind of ways that we approaches of kind of how our theory of changes basically work, like how we think to get change. Ours is, we very much trying to kind of try and work directly with them, and kind of not kind of the big public protests, and sort of trying to kind of come at them from a sort of confrontational point of view, but really trying to kind of work with them at kind of grassroots level, and kind of get voices into them they might not have heard before, and kind of do it from kind of a friendly space where we really want to try and just talk to them directly. And XR, I think they do lots of public stuff. They do some great stunts and things like that, but it's very kind of a different approach to us. We're not trying to be sort of as sort of direct in our approach dealing with those. But I think that the 2 kind of approaches complement each other very well, and I think it's important that across the movement we're all kind of both are holding the government to account very directly with XR's actions, and also kind of some of the stuff that we do, which is kind of more trying to kind of maybe swim in their wake, and then trying to, okay, you don't want to talk to XR, okay, here's us, let's talk about this stuff. So I hope, yeah, maybe that answers things a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important to recognise the coalition are working with a wider range of groups. I know we've got the Oxford WI on the meeting here today. So there is a wide audience. I'm going to want to try us to move us on, because I would like to we've got half an hour of a meeting left. And I'd like to give people an opportunity to discuss what we might do in Oxfordshire. We are in a really strong position. We've got an awful lot of innovators in startup companies, the low carbon hub, the universities. We've got more groups per head of population than any other county, I think. There's an awful lot we could be doing. So if it's okay, I'm going to move us on and just raise a couple of ideas about what we might be doing here. Question really is, what can we do locally? And we've talked about some of these points already. Clearly, we need a major lobbying exercise going on to push our government to really show leadership. It may be a good time for us to make new commitments. I think if we walk down the street and ask people what COP26 is, at the moment, there will be complete blankness. We need to change that over next year, so really get the word out. Our local councils have all declared climate emergencies in one way or another. We need to make sure that they're active partners. And it is the case that the local government international bodies will all be having events at the COP, or on the fringe. So we should be encouraging our councils to play their part in that. Stuart mentioned the idea of a festival. I think we should certainly be organising locally here. And they are talking about a huge event in Glasgow. Given Glasgow's history of political activity, it may be hard to match the general strike demonstrations in the 1920s, but they are talking of 500,000 people going to Glasgow. So how we support those to get there, whether they go by coach or walk, as some people are planning. So there's a lot we could do, and I'd be interested to hear people's ideas in the breakout groups. I'd also like to suggest one possible thing we could be doing. We've been talking about the idea of what we're calling locally determined contributions, commitments that we as local organisations would take over the next 5 years, in the same way the government's nationally determined contributions are. A way of saying, actually, we really do care about this, and we really want to make a difference. And we, whether we're a community group, a climate group, a local council, or a business, A, this is what we're doing already, and B, this is our commitment. And coming up almost with a catalogue of actions, and more importantly, a catalogue of saying this is how we are going to try and bend the carbon curve, lower emissions over the next 5 years locally. So that's one possible idea. Oxford Frontier has been talking about this with the university and the city council in a very startup way, but we'd be really interested to hear if people think that whether it's your town or your group or your town council or your faith group might actually want to make some commitments and say, we're doing this, we want the government to do an awful lot more. So with that and the previous slide, what I'm now going to do is actually ask people to move into breakout rooms. I'm hoping that we'll have about 10, 12 minutes in breakout rooms. And I would urge, there's a number of people who have volunteered to take notes and help get the groups going. I'm not sure if we've got enough for everyone. If there isn't anyone in your group who's ready to take the lead, please do, don't hesitate to do it. And I am just going to therefore ask people to, oops, and something weird has gone on. I know, there we go. I am going to move you into, and you'll have about 12 minutes. And the question I'm putting to everyone is, what can we do in Oxford? What should we do? Maybe not just what we'd like to do, but also what kind of resources and support would we need? And any ideas on how we can make COP26, take it really high up the agenda, and also make sure that Oxford is really a stronger county climate action wise as a result. So I'm going to move you into breakout rooms now. Please don't go away and come back in 12 minutes time, hopefully with someone ready to report back on what your group has done. Okay, if you don't want to join a group, groups will be back in 12 minutes, but you have got the opportunity to do that.
Okay, you know, we've said this, they've said that, and sort of do it like that, maybe.
Yeah, it just kind of, I'm glad Chris has joined us. So quite often I get the stuff from Friends of the Earth Oxford, and it feels very much like it is just Oxford. So I'm saying that for this, where we're trying to do the local viewpoint to take to the COP26, that we need to remember that it's not just Oxford, it is the villages and towns as well.
I agree, Terry, but I think Chris is there to correct me, but I think he meant Oxfordshire wide. I think it's the whole county. That's the basis that we're working on. And I too am quite rural. I think maybe not the population distribution, but just the geography of the county. We are pretty rural.
Yeah.
And earlier on, it was mentioned getting nature, the nature aspect into COP. And I wonder how, if we can think about that. So how do we link what's happening to nature locally to what's happening to the climate? And I personally, I think waiting for a festival till September next year is too late. I think it takes a huge amount of time for people, if they're not already involved or thinking. I think it's a slow process, and I would imagine a whole year of activity. I know that's a lot of work, but shared out, I think it's a year of push, soft push, but still push.
Caroline, I really like your point about the sort of like what we can do with nature locally and stuff. So I've made a note of that. Sorry, someone else was going to say something.
Yes, Jane, I'm actually in Oxford, but I used to represent a very rural area on Wiltshire County Council. And one of the great advantages of villages is you have parish councils who may or may not be sympathetic, but if they are sympathetic or can be persuaded to support your group, they are not capped financially. They're the only bit of local government that isn't. So they may well be in a position to give you some money to help organise whatever it is you're trying to do. So try and get your local parish council involved. They may also own some land you could do tree planting on.
Yeah, if I may add to this, sorry, I joined quite late. I'm very sorry, and I missed some of the discussions, but I agree with everything that has been said. And I think it's a matter of Friends of the Earth to be able to network more effectively, possibly with all kinds of groups that represent the interest of nature around Oxfordshire, such as BBOT and all the conservation groups that are doing work, you know, on small reserves, bigger reserves, as well as the schools. I think it's going to be very important to engage with the schools on that one as well.
I agree.
So that's what I would like to propose.
And yeah, we've actually got a lovely lady called Jackie who's liaising with schools and the clean air aspect of what Friends of the Earth do. So I'm happy to put a link on a chat somewhere if that is something that somebody's quite keen on, get sort of with connections with schools or anything like that.
Can I ask
a way of communities for Friends of the Earth, say, to have some way for communities to feed in what they are doing and where they may need support or assistance, or, you know, it may not be, I'm not talking financial support. Sorry, that's my clock.
That's lovely sound.
Just so that everyone's aware that this is going on, or that's...
Yeah, we do post a lot on, well, Oxfo do have a really good and active website where it does categorise off into sort of aspects, you know, if you really want to get involved with reducing plastic locally, or if you do want to get involved with schools or trees campaigns and things like that. So the website is up to date, but I do know what you mean with, obviously now at the moment people are relying a lot online, but if you're not online, then we do sort of rely on maybe the Cowley Road carnivals and those sorts of things which bring all groups of people together. So yeah, the website is quite informative on what aspects you'd like to sort of get active in, if it's worth checking out there.
The trees group has been great, you know, sort of watching what everyone's trying to plant and how they're doing it. Unfortunately, we've not been able to get hold of any land for tree planting or rewilding, so we're kind of
keep in touch with Jamie on the Oxtree website. He's brilliant.
Just can I come back on a couple of points? I didn't want to break in, but I just wanted to check that I wasn't sure if the M was Michaela. I saw it.
Me, I'm just taking notes.
Yeah, great. But the Oxfordshire thing, certainly, I think if we were going to do something for the COP, it really should be county-wide, and we should be able to get it into every village. And I think the parish councils are really important. And I speak as a parish councillor in a parish council that's declared a climate emergency. So we are on board. But I think, yeah, the county-wide stuff is really important. And I think the nature point is also really important, partly because as well as COP26, there is also the Biodiversity Convention, COP17 next year, which will be in China. And the governments will be making noises there. And we need to, I think, really need to find ways of doing that and tie into all the nature recovery stuff that BBOT and people are doing. And certainly that was one, if we were going to come up with a kind of catalogue of local activity, I think all that kind of stuff would want to feed in. And I think certainly if we were going to develop some kind of alliance towards COP, we wouldn't want it to be Oxford Friends of the Earth. We'd want it to be something like Oxfordshire Climate Action. We can put some support in, but we're trying to support here, not in any way kind of take a lead role. We all need to work together on this.
I think, Chris, there are quite a lot of established networks out there. So having taken part in the Time Is Now campaign this June, I was an individual, a very concerned individual, who looked at, just in our constituency, all the other existing town groups, but also some village ones. And as a result of that, set up our own with 3 villages, inspired by who was out there and what they were doing. Well done. So I think each constituency, just from that event in June, I'm sure they're all in. They were connected through CAG anyway, a lot of them, but people will have made extra connections just from that experience.
Well, that's an interesting one, because also you've got things like XR with its own networks. Friends of the Earth's now got 6 climate action groups dotted across the county who are tied into their network. Yeah. Different kinds of CAGs, just to confuse things.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, it's an interesting point about whether you go constituency-wide or county-wide.
Well, I think I'd go county, but I'd work in constituency in that context and see who you've got.
Well, you've also got the local authority areas, of course, which don't match your constituencies.
Yeah.
So it is a challenge.
I'd map it out.
Well, okay. Well, if you'd like to help, this is what we're going to come back and discuss. We've got about another 2 minutes. I'm going to have to round people up, so I'm going to bow out. But I hope someone can feed back, because there's some great ideas here.
I'm making notes. Is it just automatically rejoin the big group?
You will rejoin in about 2 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I gotta go. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Since we're out.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I hope
Hello.
this has been interesting.
Yeah, it was just I started, then just realized that I'm out. So, it's okay.
I hope the discussion was useful.
I think I was kicked out from the room or something.
Well, they're all closing in 4 seconds. 3.
I see. I don't know
people
how.
will be coming back. Here they come.
Oh, Shoto, you got.
No worries. No worries. Sorry, I was
just
quite,
as you were.
Yeah, I was quite slow, maybe. Sorry.
Okay. Well, we've still got 36 of us. Some people have left. Supper beckons, I guess. But I'd be really grateful if each group wanted to just come up with 3 or 4 points. And I'd be even more grateful if each group could maybe sum those up and email them back to us. But let's see what we've got. I'll just go through. I think hopefully people are aware of which group they're in. If not, we'll just go around until we've done them all.
I do group 1.
If you could, it's been pointed out that I said Oxford when I meant Oxfordshire, and I apologise. And certainly from Oxford Friends of the Earth viewpoint, if we're going to do stuff for the COP, it's got to be county-wide. Anyway, Robin, yes, please do.
Okay, there were a lot of suggestions. I think the main ones were acting on our MPs, persuading MPs to take more action and try and influence their parties. That's certainly happening in the Labour Party, where we're a bit disappointed at what Labour nationally isn't doing at the moment. Raising the issue generally across the county, using papers, but also social media, particularly to raise the issue and make more people aware of what's going on. And then following up your idea of LDCs, Chris, it's a rather nebulous discussion around that, but clearly something needs to be done to incorporate an accountability mechanism in those, and how, and also define a timescale. And I think that's an idea well worth taking forward. I'm not quite sure how and on what timescale.
Anyone think they're in group 2? Or Michaela? Maybe we'll take your...
Oh, we were group 3, but...
I'm group 2.
Oh, Fiona.
Yeah,
sorry.
Go on, Fiona.
Yeah. I'll just whistle through this very quickly. So we had an initial focus on awareness. We think there is definitely a role for creating much wider awareness across the county and linking that to action. So what is it that we would be asking people to do? And we feel that there is definitely a role for lobbying MPs and local councillors. And we had an interesting discussion about creative ways of lobbying as well. So, you know, rather than maybe just committing pen to paper or typing emails, etc., how could we do that more creatively to really get some impact and to involve more people? We also discussed having a contribution from young people, and really, for example, that could be, you know, pressure on universities. And also, as a part of that discussion, 1 day of strike action where every person under the age of 25 just walks out in support of action to make a point as well. So it might be walking out of whatever it is that they were doing, but for a good reason. And I guess that is really leveraging the school strikes there as an inspiration. We like the idea of like a mass event or a festival that brings people together, and maybe it could be a celebration of what groups and people are doing on climate action already across the county, because I don't think we're short of that. So what role could that play? We like the ideas of LDCs, locally determined contributions. Didn't really go into much of a discussion there, and we ended up on a kind of like really focusing on the coverage, the media coverage of COP, and really holding, I don't know, some like parties or mechanisms to bring people together that, like our neighbours or you know, people on our street, for example, where we're kind of like focusing on that and discussing, you know, what the outcomes are at that stage. So that's what we discussed.
Thank you, Fiona. That's quite similar to the things that we discussed in group 3 about sort of networking, sort of having all other sort of active groups having their opinions and or sort of thoughts heard as well. So that was we touched upon that sort of networking more frequently. I know Shota got ejected from our room before he got a chance to say anything, but one thing that another person said, I think it was Elizabeth, said, you know, the world is currently looking up towards Oxford University at the moment with the vaccine coming from Oxford University. Can they, you know, can it be sort of made clear about their sort of drive towards sustainability that they're doing quite currently, and maybe if they could sort of look up, if you know, everyone could look up towards that as well as sort of the vaccine, whilst perhaps the spotlight is on them currently for the vaccine. And I didn't know what Shota wanted to say. That was the only thing you wanted to briefly mention.
I think it's on the chat if you, yeah, okay. But yeah.
I can see.
Okay, so I know that I think Jan McHarry.
Yeah,
yeah,
Group
Jim
4
Smith did notes.
Yeah, I've got the notes here. So we again also really like the idea of the LDCs, but to make them effective, stress that need for your benchmarking, kind of saying where are councils, and I mean, I don't know if you can do it, but where are individuals across Oxfordshire doing? You know, what is our plastic recycling rate or whatever? So some kind of benchmarking, really important, and then linking in with the LDCs. Yep, stress kind of communication flow, keep forums like this going that share what's happening in different organisations. When you're doing that, really important, please stress Oxfordshire. So as long as you mention Oxfordshire, Oxford's automatically included. You know, people in Oxford won't get offended when you mention Oxfordshire. If you do it the other way around and you mention Oxford, it switches off half your audience. You think, oh, that's only them down there, not me. So, you know, almost put Oxford in your spell checker as a bad word. So whenever that comes up, it kind of replaces it with Oxfordshire. And then another one, so we had quite a long discussion on what the WI can do for this. So sometimes a forgotten organisation, but they've got a long history of political lobbying, quite successful. And so they might have links and connections that some other organisations struggle to get. So really use the WI. They're struggling at the moment because they're not physically meeting due to kind of the age links. But, you know, that's 4,000 women across Oxfordshire, that is. And they're currently voting through, they have like national things they vote for each year, and 2 out of their 5 are related to climate topics that are going up through the WI voting system. So definitely use the WI. Is it?
Okay, group 5. Carl, was that you or Harriet?
No, I was in group 5. We basically thought that the LDCs were a good idea, and it would be a way of getting individuals involved, because there's a kind of 2 different things that we wanted to get involved with: the individual general public and the MPs or the people who are in power. And it's important to bring both along, not just people in power. And we thought there was a big education job to get people to know what COP is, get them involved, get them interested. And that the LDCs could be a very good way of getting people involved, but it would need to be, and it could be very much down to an individual level. And if we did it as kind of mini citizens' assembly so that it was democratic. And in terms of resources, we thought the City Council could take quite a lead on this with the LDCs, if they could be involved with promoting it and kind of making it take off. And we said as well about how it's difficult to get people engaged, and we want to tap into people's interests and find ways in. And the Friends of the Earth postcard campaign from the original Climate Act was a good idea. Maybe we could repeat something like that. And that COP has a lot of jargon. We would like to get rid of some of that jargon when we're talking to people. And to be wary of fatigue setting in, because it's a long time between now and next November, and you don't want people like getting bored of the whole thing. So like the campaign that we saw the slide about was set up so that in February there was something, in June there was something else. It was kind of building up. So we thought it was important to set things up in a way that it would be going towards something and not just lots of the same thing endlessly happening, people getting bored of it.
Thanks. Okay, Richard, were you in a group?
Yeah, I'll speak on behalf of Group 6. So thank you, Chris. I'll select just 3 things that perhaps fresh ideas we've not heard so far. I mean, clearly business at the global level has a huge amount to do, and therefore this great idea about the importance of engaging local business and getting our local businesses to step up to engage with this really important. First point. Second point, there's a big public outreach and engagement work to be done here, massive. So the idea of identifying those organizations and Women's Institute and the whole host of others to lever far greater public outreach. And then the third point, we're certainly talking about citizen action, but we'd also like to get all of our councils at the county, the district and the city level to take action action in terms of their own achievements and also events and everything. We want them to engage really strongly as well. So three ideas there. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Have I missed any groups? Don't think so. I think that's everyone. Right. Well, we said this would finish at 7:15. It is now 7:14. There's a lot of really useful stuff coming in the chat, and we are recording the meeting. So we will write a summary of what you've just fed in and include some of the points or the relevant points and web links from the chat and circulate that back to people. The slides I've got and Stuart's slides we will make available to people as well. Oxford Friends of the Earth has its own monthly meeting next Wednesday, the 9th. Everyone is welcome. And we will actually be talking about the outcomes of this, unsurprisingly, since it's given us a lot to talk about. I think the idea of some kind of county-wide alliance towards COP, which might tie into the alliance on the CEE bill, as a way of getting out beyond the environmental bubble, of which I think most of us would admit that we're part of, and really getting out. The parish councils came up in our meeting, in our working group, as an important way of going forward. I think there's an enormous amount to do. And anyone got any desperate points they'd like to raise? Anyone want a last word? Fiona, anything you want to come up with from the point of view of Oxford Foe?
Yeah, I think just on this aspect of like networking and alliance, I mean, you know, we've seen networks kind of come and go in the past in terms of climate action networks. There is a kind of fragmented network already, but like, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear whether or not there actually is a network, and should that be resurrected?
Well, there was the Oxfordshire Climate Action Network about 4 years ago, but it hasn't met for a while. There is the new alliance around the CEE bill, but that's got a specific remit. This is something I think I would ask groups to think about. And when we do a mailing out, we will consult on that. There's a couple of other important points. Caroline Hunt has mentioned the fact that we need to tie the biodiversity crisis into this. And we should be aware that the COP, I think it's COP17 for the Biodiversity Convention, is also happening next year. And that will be in Kunming, I think, in China. But in many ways, of course, that will be just as important. But we can't sort the biodiversity out if the climate is screwed. So I hope this has been useful. We feel we've got a really important year ahead. And I see people are dropping out and saying goodbye. So I think now is a good time to finish. Thank you all very much for your really thoughtful contributions. There's a lot of really interesting stuff there. And we will be mailing out to people. So thanks very much for coming. And I'm sure you join me in thanking Stuart, except that he's gone. And I think that's the end. Thank you all very much and have a good evening.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks, everyone. Hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.